And I said to you guys that this is not a clean game. It's not a clean game. And that a lot of people that you see in media espousing these views, a lot of them are being paid to do so. We've already done the show where Shannon Sharpe was accused on live television. And from that moment on, there has been this push by LeBron's cronies in media to try to make it seem like this is a real thing. You've had personalities like Shannon Sharpe, Nick Wright, Colin Cowherd, Kendrick Perkins, and so many journalists and writers for some of these sports publications like ESPN, The Athletic, Bleacher Report, all putting out these similar lists.
The discussion around who truly deserves the title of the greatest basketball player of all time has shifted over the years. What was once driven by achievements and performance is now increasingly shaped by influence, presentation, and public perception. In the latest episode, Charles Tabansi and Stephen A. Smith examine how this shift may have changed the way fans understand greatness. They argue that the modern conversation surrounding LeBron James did not develop naturally over time. Instead, they suggest it was carefully promoted and widely distributed, particularly to younger audiences who may not have witnessed Michael Jordan's career firsthand. According to them, this has led to a version of the debate that feels less balanced and more curated. The analysts point to recurring media rankings, selective storytelling, and powerful industry voices as factors that help shape this narrative. In their view, the repetition of these messages created momentum that eventually felt like consensus, even if the foundation was still disputed. They stress that this is not about dismissing LeBron's talent, but about questioning how the discussion has been framed. Charles Tabansi opens a debate by challenging the logic behind one of the most cited turning points, the 2016 NBA Finals. He finds it difficult to accept the idea that a single championship, even one that involved a dramatic comeback, could instantly elevate a player into the same category as Michael Jordan. He highlights how quickly the storyline changed after that series. In his assessment, the shift did not come from a long-term evaluation of career impact, but from a sudden narrative surge. To him, that jump felt accelerated rather than earned through consistent, era-defining dominance. Charles questions whether one defining moment should outweigh years of sustained excellence built by players who shaped entire generations of the sport. He argues that greatness is not determined by isolated peaks, but by a body of work that stands strong across time and competition. What he ultimately points out is a growing reliance on selective moments rather than full career analysis. By focusing on individual highlights instead of long-term influence, the debate becomes more dramatic but less accurate. For Charles, this selective framing is a first indication that the conversation may be driven more by storytelling than by substance. That, in his view, when criteria change to fit preferred outcome, it raises serious questions. And that, he believes, is where the discussion around basketball's greatest player begins to lose its credibility.
2016, he won that championship against the Warriors, and all of a sudden LeBron went from being like a top 10 player, all of a sudden he's next to Michael Jordan. He passed Tim Duncan, he passed Larry Bird, he passed Magic Johnson, he passed Kobe Bryant, he passed Shaq, he passed.
Charles then deepens his argument by pointing to well-known media voices such as Nick Wright, Shannon Sharpe, and Kendrick Perkins. He questions how consistently these commentators place LeBron James above Michael Jordan, often presenting the view as settled fact rather than open debate. In Charles's view, this pattern deserves closer examination. He argues that this is not simply a matter of individual opinions or passionate commentary. Instead, he suggests that the repetition and uniformity of these arguments signals something more deliberate. To him, it appears less like spontaneous analysis and more like a shared narrative being reinforced across multiple platforms. Charles raises concerns that these discussions are influenced by professional relationships and personal affiliations rather than a neutral evaluation of basketball history. When similar points are repeated word for word across different shows, he believes it weakens the claim of independent judgment. That level of alignment, in his eyes, is difficult to ignore. He encourages viewers to think critically about what they are hearing. Analysis, he explains, should challenge ideas, not recycle them. When debate becomes predictable and one-sided, it risks shaping public opinion without allowing room for historical context or comparison. According to Charles, this approach has a clear effect on younger audiences. Fans who did not witness Michael Jordan's era may accept these repeated claims as established truth simply because they hear them so often. Over time, repetition can replace experience. His core message is not about silencing opinion, but about transparency. Charles urges viewers to recognize the difference between open discussion and guided narratives. Only by questioning how and why certain viewpoints dominate the conversation, he says, can fans truly understand the history of the game and form their own informed conclusions.
From that moment on, there has been this push by LeBron's cronies and media to try to make it seem like this is a real thing. You've had personalities like Shannon Sharpe, Nick Wright, Colin Cowherd, Kendrick Perkins, and so many journalists and writers for some of these sports publications like ESPN, The Athletic, Bleacher Report, all putting out these similar lists.
Charles then takes the argument a step further, making it clear that he does not see this as a fair or balanced discussion. In his view, the debate has drifted away from honest disagreement and into something far more complicated. He believes the conversation has been influenced in ways the public rarely sees. According to Charles, many familiar faces on major sports networks are no longer sharing independent viewpoints. Instead, he suggests that outside pressures, professional relationships, and behind-the-scenes incentives may be shaping how certain narratives are presented. This, he argues, raises serious concerns about credibility. He singles out Shannon Sharpe as an example, not to dismiss his knowledge of the game, but to question consistency of his stance. Charles claims that the commentary often sounds less like analysis and more like advocacy, repeatedly reinforcing the same conclusion without exploring counterarguments. What makes Charles' position stronger is how he frames the issue. He does not describe it as simple bias or personal preference. Rather, he views it as a structured effort to guide public opinion toward a predetermined conclusion. In his assessment, the line between commentary and promotion has become blurred. Charles believes this trend does real harm to sports media as a whole. When analysis appears influenced by loyalty or access instead of evidence and history, trust begins to erode. Audiences expect honest evaluation, not messaging shaped by unseen interests. For him, the stakes go beyond one-player comparison. The real concern is the integrity of the conversation itself. If opinions are shaped by influence rather than independent thought, then accuracy suffers. And when that happens, the audience loses a chance to engage with the truth in a meaningful way.
I said to you guys that this is not a clean game. It's not a clean game. And that a lot of people that you see in media espousing these views, a lot of them are being paid to do so. We've already done the show where Shannon Sharpe was accused on live television.
Stephen A. Smith steps into the discussion with one of his most pointed critiques yet of the modern LeBron James narrative. He begins by clearly recognizing LeBron's talent and accomplishments, making it known that respect for ability is not the issue. However, Smith separates admiration from analysis and focuses on what he believes is happening beyond the court. According to Smith, there has been long-standing pressure within certain media circles to guide how LeBron's legacy is presented to the public. He argues that this influence has shaped coverage over time, encouraging agreement rather than open discussion. In his view, the goal has shifted away from comparison and toward conclusion. Smith emphasizes that this is a serious concern because sports journalism is meant to inform, not direct opinion. He suggests that respected platforms have sometimes echoed the same framing repeatedly, limiting room for disagreement. When narratives are reinforced often enough, he warns, they begin to feel unquestionable. He contrasts this approach with how past legends built their reputations. Players like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Kobe Bryant, Bill Russell, and Michael Jordan did not rely on coordinated messaging to define their place in history. Their careers unfolded publicly, and their legacies were shaped by performance, championships, and long-term impact. Smith argues that the difference today lies in the effort to shape perception in advance rather than allowing history to form naturally. He believes this has altered the tone of the greatest of all time discussion, shifting it away from organic debate and toward repeated messaging. For Smith, this change matters deeply. When discussion becomes guided rather than explored, passion turns into persuasion. And when persuasion replaces open analysis, The conversation around greatness loses the balance and honesty it deserves.
And First Take featuring Kendrick Perkins, Stephen A. Smith, Michael Wilbon. I'm not sure if Brian Windhorst was there. They were discussing this very issue. And as they were talking about it, Michael Wilbon gave his speech. And then he said, I can think of nothing negative to say about LeBron James. There's nothing negative to say. So after he finished speaking, Kendrick Perkins spoke. And then Stephen A. Smith started off with, I can think of a lot of things to say. And then he went on to expose how the Clutch Sports machine has been pressuring journalists and analysts for years to say LeBron James is the GOAT.
Stephen A. Smith continues his argument by drawing a clear distinction between confidence and overreach. He explains that believing in one's greatness is natural for elite athletes, but attempting to actively shape public agreement crosses into different territory. In his view, there is a meaningful difference between earning recognition and repeatedly declaring it. Smith reflects on how LeBron James and those around him have consistently promoted the idea of him being the greatest of all time. This message, he notes, has been reinforced through interviews, public statements, and repeated branding. While confidence is expected at that level, Smith questions whether the repetition served the game or the narrative. To illustrate his point, Smith looks back at earlier icons of the sport. Players such as Tim Duncan, Wilt Chamberlain, and Michael Jordan rarely labeled themselves as the best. When asked, many of them responded with restraint, choosing humility and allowing their achievements to speak for themselves over time. Smith argues that this contrast is important. In past eras, legacy was shaped by results and reflection, not self-promotion. Fans, historians, and analysts played the role of deciding greatness, not the players themselves. That separation, he believes, preserved authenticity. What troubles Smith is what he sees as a coordinated echo of self-identification. When the same message is repeated by close associates and media allies, he feels it begins to look less like organic support and more like narrative control. The focus shifts from performance to perception. For Smith, this is where the discussion loses sincerity. Greatness, he argues, cannot be installed into public consciousness by repetition alone. It must be recognized naturally. When the effort becomes about directing belief rather than earning it, the conversation moves away from history and toward image management. In his assessment, the issue is no longer just what happens on the court. It becomes about how greatness is presented, protected, and promoted. And that shift, Smith believes, changes the spirit of the debate entirely.
Trying to compel people to say he was the greatest. Michael Jordan didn't say that about himself. Kobe Bryant didn't say that about himself. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar didn't say that about himself. Bill Russell didn't say that about himself. Tim Duncan didn't say that about himself. Nobody said that. Nobody but him in his camp. Steph Curry hasn't said that about himself. Steph Curry has never called himself the greatest shooter of all time. Ray Allen never called himself the greatest shooter of all time. Reggie Miller never called himself the greatest shooter of all time. Allen Houston never called himself the greatest shooter of all time. Nobody called himself the greatest in anything but that man in his camp.
Charles Tabansi closes the discussion by focusing on what he sees as the most troubling element of the entire debate, a lack of honesty. In his view, the people most aggressively promoting LeBron James as the greatest of all time are not interested in thoughtful comparison or historical accuracy. Instead, he believes their priority is attention and visibility. Charles argues that many of these voices thrive on engagement-driven content rather than meaningful analysis. He suggests that bold claims and dramatic framing are used to spark reactions, not to encourage informed discussion. Over time, this approach replaces depth with repetition. He is particularly concerned about how this messaging reaches younger fans. Many of them never watched Michael Jordan play and have no direct reference point for that era. As a result, their understanding of basketball history is shaped almost entirely by what appears on their screens today. According to Charles, constant exposure to the same conclusions, delivered with confidence and flair, creates the illusion of certainty. The message becomes accepted not because it has been carefully examined, but because it is everywhere. Repetition begins to stand in for evidence. He believes this pattern gradually pushes aside longtime fans and historians who remember past eras firsthand. Their perspectives, rooted in experience, struggle to compete with louder, more frequent messaging. Over time, that imbalance reshapes the conversation. For Charles, the issue goes beyond one-player comparison. He sees a risk to the culture of the sport itself. When history is simplified, redirected, or reshaped for influence rather than understanding, the game loses part of its identity. And that, he argues, is why this debate matters far more than just who holds the title of greatest.
I also believe that these lot of personalities, whatever you want to call them, are by far the most dishonest set of people we've seen in sports media probably ever. Because what they do is they go out there and they grift and they say anything that they feel will gain them traction with younger fans.
So what are we actually seeing unfold in this ongoing debate? According to both Charles Tabansi and Stephen A. Smith, the conversation has drifted far from simple comparisons of championships, records, or on-court impact. In their view, the discussion has evolved into something much larger than basketball. They argue that the modern GOAT debate is now shaped by influence, visibility, and control over messaging. Rather than allowing history to guide conclusions, powerful media networks and branding forces are playing an increasing role in steering public perception. The result, they say, is a narrative that feels directed rather than discovered. Charles and Smith believe modern platforms have amplified this shift. Social media, non-stop debate shows, and short-form content make it easier to repeat a message until it feels unquestionable. Younger fans, especially those without first-hand experience of earlier eras, may absorb these conclusions without ever seeing the full historical context. They stress that this does not require agreement or disagreement with any one player's greatness. The concern is how conclusions are formed and presented. When influence replaces evaluation, the integrity of the discussion begins to weaken. One thing, however, stands out clearly. The debate itself has changed. What was once an open conversation grounded in performance and legacy now carries the weight of persuasion and repetition. That shift makes critical thinking more important than ever. Revisiting the history, examining careers in full, and questioning how narratives are shaped are essential steps for any fan who want a deeper understanding of the game. The question remains open for everyone to decide. Is today's GOAT conversation a result of careful analysis, or has it been shaped by modern influence?